Hello, my Beyond Color Stories family. I am your storyteller, James. Today I want to share something very close to my heart. My wife, Selena, has started her own channel, Alcott Stories, where she brings you romance, thrill, and dramatic storytelling like never before. She has a magical way of touching hearts through words, and I know you'll love her stories just as much as mine. So, I humbly ask you to support her the way you've always supported me. Please subscribe to Alcott Stories and join her on this beautiful new journey. Thank you from both of us for keeping the love for stories alive.
Hello, beautiful souls. I am Selena James. First of all, let me thank you from the bottom of my heart for the endless love and support you've always given to James. Watching him share stories with you and seeing the bond you've built together has truly inspired me. Now, let's dive into today's roller coaster of emotions and see where this story takes us. One call, one mafia boss, one night that changed her life forever. The air in the hospital parking garage felt too still, as though the concrete walls themselves were holding their breath. Zahara's footsteps echoed sharply against the floor, each one faster than the last. But when her eyes locked on the figure leaning casually against a black car, her pulse slammed against her ribs. He wasn't supposed to be real. He was supposed to remain a phantom voice through a phone line, a fleeting nightmare she could convince herself never happened. Yet there he was, Kael Vance. Black leather jacket draped over broad shoulders, dark jeans fitting with careless ease, and eyes that carried both danger and something she couldn't name. His gaze pinned her in place before her instincts could push her to run. He straightened, the low hum of his movement echoing with control, every step deliberate, every breath heavy with the weight of someone who knew he would never be denied. "Zahara Hayes," he said, his voice carrying across the cavernous silence, deep and smooth like a velvet blade. Her throat tightened. You you have the wrong person," she whispered, clutching her bag like a shield, but the moment the words left her mouth, she knew how useless they sounded. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more of a recognition of the obvious. "I don't have the wrong person. You answered a call that wasn't yours, and now the world has taken notice. You're in it, whether you like it or not." She shook her head, the fluorescent lights buzzing above like a swarm of angry bees. "I don't know anything about your world. I just want to go home." For a long beat, he studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he pushed off the car with a grace that was almost feline. When he closed the distance between them, Zahara's breath caught, her chest heaving in shallow bursts. He stopped just inches away, and she could smell leather, smoke, and something sharper beneath, Dan. Jir wrapped in human form. His hand lifted, not to touch, but to gesture toward the elevator behind her. "You'll come with me. If you don't, you won't survive the week." The certainty in his tone wasn't a threat, it was fact, a cold truth presented without mercy. "Survive?" she echoed, her voice trembling. "Why would anyone come after me?" His eyes flicked down her face, resting on the frantic pulse at her throat before returning to her gaze. "Because someone wants what they think you have, and when they come, they won't knock politely. They'll take, they'll break, and they won't leave you breathing." Zahara's stomach twisted, her mind screaming to run, yet her feet rooted to the spot. The tension stretched between them, electric and unbearable, until a new sound shattered it, the faint scuff of rubber on concrete. Kael's head snapped toward the noise, his entire body shifting into a predator's alert stance. From the shadows at the far end of the garage, a masked figure emerged, gun glinting under the sickly yellow lights. Zahara's scream caught in her throat as the man raised the weapon, aiming straight at her. Before she could even blink, Kael's arm slammed around her waist, pulling her behind the hard line of his body. "Stay down," he barked, voice sharp and commanding, while his other hand went for the gun holstered at his side. The next seconds blurred into chaos. A shot cracked through the garage, sparking against metal as Kael shoved her toward the concrete pillar. She stumbled, hitting the ground hard, her palms stinging as she tried to crawl backward. Kael moved with terrifying speed, returning fire. each step purposeful, fearless. The masked gunman ducked behind a parked car, glass shattering as bullets ripped through the air. Zahara pressed her hands over her ears, her heart hammering, tears blurring her vision. She'd seen blood before in the hospital, but his wasn't clean or controlled. It was raw, merciless violence playing out inches from her trembling body. Kael advanced without hesitation, crouching low, his jacket whipping behind him as he cornered the attacker. Another gunshot cracked, and the intruder yelped, collapsing to the ground, weapon skittering out of reach. Kael stood over him, breathing steady, face set in ice. Zahara couldn't look away. He was beautiful and terrifying in the same breath, the kind of man who ruled not just with power, but with inevitability. The silence that followed was broken only by the gunman's groans. Kael knelt, gripping the man's mask and yanking it off, revealing a young face twisted in pain and fear. "Who sent you?" Kael demanded, voice low but laced with venom. The man shook his head, coughing blood. "You already know," he gasped. Kael's jaw clenched, eyes narrowing, but before he could press further, the man's chest stilled, life draining away. Zahara flinched, covering her mouth to smother a cry. Kael stood, wiping blood from his knuckles onto his jeans as though it were nothing, then turned back to her. His gaze softened by a fraction when it landed on her shaking frame. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly. "This is why you can't just go home and pretend none of this touched you. They'll keep coming until they've ripped everything from you." Zahara wanted to argue, wanted to scream at him for dragging her into this nightmare, but the truth pressed heavy against her chest. She wasn't safe, not anymore, maybe not ever again. Kael extended his hand, palm open, waiting. "You have two choices, Zahara Hayes. Walk back into that elevator and hope you make it to your car before the next one comes. Or come with me and live." Her breaths came ragged, her eyes darting to the dead man sprawled just feet away. She looked at Kael's hand, strong, steady, commanding, and hated that some treacherous part of her wanted to take it. "Why me?" she whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. "What did I do to deserve this?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, not pit, not weakness, but a shadow of understanding. "You answered a call by mistake," he said, his voice quieter now, more dangerous for its softness. "And fate doesn't deal in refunds." His hand remained outstretched, patient but unyielding, as though he already knew her choice before she made it. The garage seemed to shrink around her, the walls closing in with the weight of inevitability. Her fingers trembled as she hovered on the edge of surrender, every instinct screaming at her to resist, every heartbeat betraying her with the pull she felt toward him. Kael's eyes locked on hers, dark and unrelenting, and she realized that in that moment, no matter what choice she made, her life would never be her own again. The garage was silent, except for the faint hum of flickering fluorescent lights, shadows stretching long across the cold concrete. Zahara slowed her steps when she saw him. The man from the call. The stranger who had turned her world upside down with a single voice, low and commanding, now stood in the flesh. Leaning casually against a sleek black car, Kael Vance looked as though he had been waiting for her all night, patient, certain, like a hunter who already knew the outcome of the chase. Her throat tightened, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. She wanted to turn, to run back inside the hospital, but her body betrayed her, frozen by the intensity of his gaze. He straightened slowly, pushing off the car with a fluid ease that made her skin prickle. Every movement spoke of control, the kind of control that didn't need to be announced. It was simply there, heavy in the air, wrapping around her like a chain. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "What do you want?" she managed, though her voice cracked. Kael's eyes glimmered under the harsh light, dark pools that revealed nothing. His lips curved slightly, not in warmth, but as if her question amused him. "What do I want?" he repeated, his voice smooth, deliberate. He took a step toward her, and the echo of his boot on concrete made her heart stumble in her chest. "Zahara Hayes, you already know what I want. If you didn't, you wouldn't be trembling." I'm not trembling, she lied, forcing her chin higher though her knees threatened to buckle. He stopped just a breath away, close enough that the scent of leather and smoke clung to the air around him. Your body disagrees, he murmured, his eyes sweeping her face, lingering on the quick rise and fall of her chest. She shifted back instinctively, but he followed, slow and steady, making the distance shrink until her back nearly brushed against a pillar. You have the wrong person, she tried again, more desperate this time. I don't know you. I don't belong in whatever this is. For a long moment he studied her, silence pressing heavy between them, broken only by the buzzing of the lights. Then his jaw tightened. You answered a call that wasn't yours, he said, voice low but sharp as glass. And now the world believes you hold something worth killing for. Zahara's breath hitched. The words sounded like nonsense, like a story she didn't belong to, yet the certainty in his tone made her stomach twist. That's insane. I don't have anything. I'm just a nurse. I go to work, I go home. That's it. Kael's gaze softened by a fraction, though his expression remained unreadable. You think innocence will protect you? It won't. The moment you picked up that phone, you became a piece on the board, and pieces get taken. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She shook her head, desperate to wake up from this nightmare. I didn't choose this. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does, he replied quietly. But here you are. His nearness suffocated her, not because it was unwelcome, but because it was too much, too sharp, too heavy, too consuming. She felt her breath shallow, her palms damp, her body betraying her with a trembling she couldn't hide. Why are you here? She whispered. Why me? Kael tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. Because once fate marks someone, there's no undoing it. His words were calm, yet they struck like a storm, wrapping around her until she could hardly breathe. Zahara's fingers trembled around her bag strap. I should go, she whispered. I should walk away right now. Go then, he said, though his tone held no real permission, only challenge. His shoulders relaxed, but his eyes burned like coals. But if you leave, you won't make it to your car before someone else comes for you, and they won't be as patient as I am. Her stomach dropped. You're threatening me. His expression darkened. No, I'm warning you. The silence stretched again, thick, unbearable. Zahara glanced toward the elevator, her body screaming for escape, but her mind tangled in fear. The wrong number had already stolen her peace. Now it threatened her life. Kael took another step forward, his hand lifting slightly, hovering near her arm, but not touching, as if daring her to move away. Do you understand now, Zahara? You don't get to pretend this didn't happen. You're in the storm, and the only choice you have left is how you survive it. Her lips parted, but no words came. His presence consumed her, an unshakable force pressing in from every side. She hated that even as terror gripped her, another current ran beneath it, an unwanted pull, a magnetic heat she couldn't explain. Kael's eyes locked on hers, sharp and unwavering. You're mine now, he said softly, the words a claim, not a request. Her chest tightened, the weight of his declaration pressing into her bones. You don't get to decide that, she whispered, though even she didn't believe it. His mouth curved again, faint, dangerous. I already have. The echo of his words lingered in the stillness of the garage, wrapping around her like a chain she couldn't see, but already felt tightening. The world she knew was slipping away, and somewhere deep inside, she realized there was no going back. The words hung between them like smoke, thick and suffocating, impossible to wave away. Zahara's pulse hammered as though trying to tear itself free from her chest. She wanted to deny him, to spit back fire and reclaim her breath, but the certainty in his tone left her paralyzed. There was no bravado in his voice, no empty threat, only truth carved into steel. Her lips parted, trembling, but the protest she tried to shape dissolved on her tongue. His gaze didn't waver. It was unrelenting, dark as a midnight tide, pulling her deeper even as every instinct screamed to resist. You don't know me, she managed, her voice a broken whisper. You can't just say that. I know enough, he answered, low and steady. Enough to see you don't belong in this war, but you've been dragged into it. And now? His eyes narrowed, glinting like a blade in the half-light. You belong to me, whether you accept it or not. Her stomach twisted, anger sparking beneath the fear. You think you can just claim people? Like they're things to be owned? He leaned closer, not touching her, but close enough that the heat of his presence wrapped around her like a brand. I don't claim people, he murmured. I claim what I protect. And I protect what I claim. The air between them thickened, heavy with words left unsaid until the silence cracked. Sharp, sudden, violent. A sound, faint but chilling, echoed from the far end of the garage. The scrape of a shoe, the shift of shadow. Kael's head snapped toward the noise, his entire body transforming in an instant. The quiet predator became a wall of steel, his stance tightening, senses sharpened. Zahara's breath hitched as she followed his gaze, her eyes widening when a masked figure slipped out of the darkness, the glint of metal flashing in his grip. Stay down, Kael ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a whip. She barely had time to blink before he shoved her back again. Against the concrete pillar, his body shielding hers as the first gunshot shattered the silence. The sound ripped through the garage, ricocheting against the walls, echoing into her bones. She gasped, ducking low as Kael drew his weapon with fluid precision, returning fire before the attacker had time to breathe. Concrete splintered above her head, sparks flying as bullets tore into the steel railing of the stairwell. Zahara pressed her palms to the ground, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. She'd seen men dying in hospital beds, seen blood spill quietly under fluorescent lights. But this was chaos, brutal and deafening. Kael moved like he was born to it. Every step was sharp, purposeful, calculated. He fired once, twice, each shot pushing the masked intruder back, forcing him to retreat behind a parked sedan. Glass shattered, alarms wailed, and the acrid scent of gunpowder filled the air. Zahara crawled backward, her breath ragged, but her gaze locked on Kael. He was terrifying, yes, but in that moment, he was also unshakable, fearless. He didn't flinch when bullets sparked inches from his shoulder. He didn't hesitate when danger closed in. He fought with the certainty of a man who knew hesitation meant death. The masked figure lunged from cover, firing wildly. Kael lunged to the side, gripping Zahara's arm, dragging her out of the open with a force that left her breathless. Stay with me, he growled, his eyes fierce, before he released her just long enough to return fire. The intruder staggered as a bullet struck his leg, a pained cry echoing through the garage. He stumbled but didn't stop, crawling for cover, desperation etched into every movement. Kael advanced, relentless, his boots pounding against the concrete. Another shot rang out, sharper this time, and the man collapsed fully, weapons skittering across the floor with a metallic screech. Zahara's hand flew to her mouth, choking back a scream. The attacker writhed, clutching his side, blood spreading in a dark pool beneath him. Kael loomed over the fallen man, his face unreadable, his weapon steady. Who sent you? His voice was cold, lethal, carved from ice. The man coughed, spitting crimson, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and defiance. You already know, he rasped, his voice barely audible. Kael's jaw clenched, a shadow darkening his features. He crouched low, gripping the man by his collar, pulling him close. Say it, he demanded. The attacker's lips twisted in a bitter smile, blood staining his teeth. Volkov doesn't stop, he whispered. He'll burn everything, everything you touch. Zahara's breath caught, her chest tightening at the name. She didn't know who Volkov was, not fully, but the way Kael's expression hardened told her enough. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. She was tangled in something vast and merciless. Before Kael could press further, the man's body stilled, his eyes glazing over, his chest falling silent. Death claimed him with quiet finality, leaving only blood and the echo of his last words behind. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. Zahara pressed herself against the pillar, trembling, her heart galloping out of control. She couldn't look at the body, couldn't process the violence that had unfolded in mere minutes. Kael rose slowly, sliding his weapon back into its holster, his shoulders broad, his movements steady, as though nothing had just happened. His gaze found hers, softening just barely when he saw the terror etched across her face. "This is your world now," he said quietly, each word deliberate, measured. "Do you understand? This is why you can't walk away. They won't let you." Her eyes burned, tears threatening to spill as she shook her head. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "No one does," he replied, stepping closer, his voice low, edged with something unspoken. "But now you have a choice. You can deny it, pretend you're safe, and they'll tear you apart. Or—" His eyes burned into hers, sharp and unrelenting. "You let me protect what's mine." The echo of his claim lingered, heavier now than before, wrapped in blood and smoke and truth. Zahara's breath shuddered as she stared at him, caught between fury and fear, between denial and something far more dangerous stirring deep inside. And though she didn't answer, she knew the moment she looked into Kael's eyes that her life had shifted forever. Zahara sat in stunned silence, her breath uneven as Kael's words poured over her like shards of broken glass, each truth sharper than the last, cutting into the image she had carried all her life of her father as the gentle, selfless man who healed strangers and came home smelling faintly of antiseptic and lavender soap. Her pulse thudded in her ears as Kael leaned closer, his voice lower, edged with something that wasn't quite cruelty, but carried the weight of a confession too heavy to release without consequence. And when he told her that Dr. Eris Thorne, her father, had been laundering money for Mikhail Volkov's empire, she nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the only defense her mind could conjure against the tidal wave of disbelief. Her lips parted, trembling, and she whispered that Kael was lying, that this was some ploy to frighten her into submission. But the storm in Kael's gray eyes told her he wished it were a lie, and for a fleeting second she saw the strain on his jaw, the kind of tension that came from ripping open old wounds. She thought of the fire that had taken her parents, the official report that labeled it an accident, and suddenly the flames in her memory seemed more sinister. The crackling wood-like gunfire, the smoke like a shroud pulled over the truth, and tears welled in her eyes as Kael's voice broke softer now, telling her that her father had grown afraid, had wanted out, had plied, and to expose Volkov, and that decision had sealed his fate. She pressed her hands against her chest as though she could hold her heart in place, whispering that her father was a healer, a man who saved lives, not destroyed them. But Kael shook his head slowly, explaining that even good men could make desperate choices when shadows coiled too tightly around them, and that Eris Thorne had been a man walking a line between two worlds, one with patients who trusted him, and another with criminals who threatened him. And when Zahara's anger sparked hot, accusing Kael of staining her father's memory with poisonous lies, he lowered his gaze for a moment before revealing that his own father had once trusted Dr. Thorne, that the two men had forged an alliance no one else knew about, a bond rooted in survival and perhaps even friendship. And Zahara froze, her confusion folding in on itself, because if Kael's father had trusted hers, then the man she hated, the Mafia boss standing before her, carried within him a tether to the father she had loved. She staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for balance, her voice a jagged whisper demanding why he was telling her this now, and Kael's answer was a knife wrapped in velvet, that she deserved the truth no matter how much it broke her, because lies would only destroy her more slowly. And as his hand reached out as if to steady her, she flinched, not from fear of him, but from fear of herself, of the fragile part that wanted to believe him, even as her mind screamed in protest. The silence between them grew heavy, charged with grief and fury, and when her sob escaped, raw and unguarded, Kael's shoulders stiffened, as though her pain cut into him too, though he didn't move closer, didn't dare, because he knew she would see any comfort as manipulation. Zahara wiped her tears with trembling fingers, her world tilting on an axis she no longer recognized, and she whispered that if what he said was true, then her entire life had been a performance staged to hide a man she never really knew. And Kael said nothing, only watching her with eyes that carried shadows of his own past, as though he knew too well what it meant to discover that the people who gave you life were not the saints you thought them to be. The silence deepened until the air itself seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, and Zahara's breath came shallow, her body weary from truth she hadn't asked for, her gaze locked on Kael as if daring him to say more, to confirm or deny. But before he could speak again, her phone buzzed on the table, the vibration sharp in the stillness, making her jump. And when she glanced at the screen, her blood ran cold as she saw the message glowing like a fresh wound. He lied to you. Meet me alone. Zahara's fingers shook as she stared at the screen. The words burned into her mind like acid, each letter a warning she couldn't ignore, and her chest tightened as a storm of confusion, fear, and disbelief surged through her. Her first instinct was to call Kael, to demand his presence, to lean on the man who had already claimed her life as his. But another, quieter voice in her head whispered caution, and she realized she had no idea whom to trust. Not fully, not even him, even though her body ached to run into his arms, to find refuge in his certainty. Kael's gaze, dark and unwavering, followed her every tremor, and he took a step closer, his presence a shield against the invisible storm threatening to pull her under. And yet even he seemed unsure of the message, the unseen hand that had sent it, because he didn't touch her, didn't intervene, only allowed the tension to coil around her like a living thing. Her eyes darted back to the message, to the name she didn't recognize, the words that implied deception. And for the first time, Zahara understood that this war wasn't just outside her. It had been inside her own life all along, hiding beneath the familiar walls of memory and family, twisting too. People she had loved into ghosts she could no longer recognize. Kael cleared his throat, low, deliberate, breaking the frozen air between them. You need to be careful, he said, the words both warning and promise, and she turned to him, breath caught, trying to form a question, to demand answers, but all that came out was a shuddering, "Why now?" He shook his head, eyes narrowing slightly, tension tightening the line of his jaw. "Because the game has started again," he replied, voice quiet, deadly, carrying the weight of men who had killed without hesitation, the kind of men who would make her regret being born if she stepped wrong. Her fingers trembled over the phone, debating whether to respond, to obey, to step into danger in the hope of uncovering the truth, and Kael's eyes never left hers, sharp, calculating, unreadable, a predator's gaze with a flicker of something that almost resembled concern. "You can't go alone," he said finally, cutting through her spiraling thoughts, his voice softening slightly, though the steel behind it remained, and she shook her head, furious at herself for needing protection, for wanting it even as fear coursed through her veins. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. But Kael stepped closer, narrowing the distance, until the heat of his body pressed against her awareness, a quiet warning that this was no longer about argument, no longer about opinion, but survival. And when she felt the ghost of his breath near her ear, she nearly inhaled sharply, caught between instinct and desire. Kael's hand hovered near her arm, brushing just enough to remind her of his presence without claiming her, and she bit her lip, aware that the physicality, subtle as it was, pulled at something deeper than reason. "I won't let anyone hurt you," he murmured, almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear, and it made her heart stutter because the words were not soft, not sentimental. They were iron forged around a promise she had no right to trust, but wanted desperately to. Zahara's gaze fell to the floor, her mind spinning with fragments of her father's secrets, the fire, the lies, Volkov's name, the alliances Kael spoke of, the shadowed world her life had now intersected, and she realized with a cold shock that the next steps she took could shatter her completely or redefine her existence in ways she wasn't ready to comprehend. Her fingers finally typed a cautious reply. Simple, cautious, trembling as she hit send, and she watched the phone as if the glowing screen could answer her questions before they even formed. Kael's eyes followed the movement, his expression unreadable, though the tension in his shoulders suggested that even he recognized the magnitude of what she had just done. The elevator chimed in the distance, breaking the quiet like a fragile bell, and Zahara felt the weight of reality pressing down, the garage, the shadows, the threat unseen but palpable, the air thick with danger, and she realized she had stepped from a world of light into one of shadows, each step forward a gamble she couldn't retreat from. Kael gestured toward his car, a sleek black machine that seemed to swallow light, and when she hesitated, he said nothing, only waited, his eyes locking on hers, and she understood that hesitation was no longer an option, not if she wanted answers, not if she wanted to survive. As she approached the car, the tension coiled tighter, the hum of the garage and the distant city noise fading, leaving only the raw immediacy of their presence, his claim over her, and the message that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew. Kael opened the door silently, gesturing for her to enter, and she did, though each step felt like crossing a line she couldn't uncross, and as the door clicked shut behind her, she felt a shiver run down her spine, both from fear and from something else, something dangerous and irresistible that pulsed between them like electricity in the air. The engine roared to life beneath her, vibrations crawling into her chest, and Kael's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, dark and unblinking, a question unspoken passing between them, neither needing words. Because the understanding was absolute, the world had shifted, the rules were gone, and the next move would decide everything. Zahara gripped her bag tightly, the message still burning in her mind, and she realized she didn't know if she should obey it, confront it, or run. But Kael's steady hand on the wheel, his calm control, his constant presence reminded her that even in this chaos, she had an anchor, dangerous and terrifying though it was. The streets blurred past as they drove, shadows stretching across buildings, the night wrapping them in secrecy, the city alive but unaware of the storm passing through its veins. She stole glances at Kael, at the set line of his jaw, the flicker of movement in his eyes that betrayed thought, and she wondered what he carried with him, what he hadn't said, what shadows he hid behind the veneer of strength, and the thought made her stomach tighten, both with curiosity and an inexplicable, dangerous pull. The silence between them was a living thing, breathing in sync with the car's engine, heavy with anticipation, the kind that made her fingertips itch to touch, to ask, to understand. But the fear and the unknown kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Kael finally spoke, low, deliberate, and her ears drank every word. "Someone doesn't want you to know the truth," he said, voice steady, unwavering. "But they want you to feel the fear of it. That fear will lead you somewhere, if you survive." Zahara swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking into her, chilling her, igniting a fire she didn't know she had. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her bag, nails digging into her palm, grounding her even as panic threatened to unravel her. She realized then that the war she had stumbled into was personal, intimate, inescapable, and that the next step, who she chose to trust, who she chose to follow, would define everything. Kael's eyes met hers again, a silent question, an unspoken challenge, and she felt it in her bones. The choice wasn't between right and wrong anymore. It was between living and being claimed, between surrender and survival. And in that moment, Zahara Hayes understood that nothing would ever be simple again, that the path ahead was dark, dangerous, and inescapably hers to walk. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the thrill that pulsed through her, a fire she hadn't known she needed. The city lights flickered past, and the message glowed in her pocket, a promise and a threat entwined, and Zahara felt the first flicker of decision take root, tentative, yet undeniable, that she would meet whoever sent it, but not alone, not unprepared, and perhaps not without Kael by her side, even if it scared her to admit how much she needed him. The night stretched endlessly ahead, the engines hum a metronome to her racing heart, the unknown waiting for them. But with Kael's eyes on the road and hers on him, she knew the moment had arrived where nothing would be the same again, and every breath she drew carried the weight of secrets, lies, and the first flickers of trust she wasn't sure she deserved, but could no longer deny. Zahara's hands trembled as she held the small black clutch against her chest, the words of the message still searing her mind, and she glanced over her shoulder once, twice, as if the shadows themselves might leap from the walls to drag her back into the hospital's sterile safety she had left behind. But she knew safety no longer existed, and each step toward the abandoned warehouse felt like walking into the heart of a storm she could not escape, her pulse drumming in her ears louder than the distant hum of the city, a relentless reminder that her life had shifted irreversibly, and the night itself seemed to lean closer, pressing against her with K intent, while Kael's warnings echoed like a ghost, unheeded but impossible to forget, and she shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of anticipation, the magnetism of danger that pulled her forward. Even as every instinct screamed retreat, and the narrow alley leading to the meeting place felt narrower with every step, walls stretching high with peeling paint, shadows pooling in the corners, and the faint sound of footsteps behind her, careful, deliberate, made her muscles tense, heart lurching, though when she spun, the alley was empty, only darkness staring back, and she realized then how alone she truly was, carrying her fear like a fragile lantern that could shatter at any moment, the faint scent of rain on asphalt mixing with the grime of the city, heavy with a promise of violence, and she pressed on, gripping the clutch tighter, the message's demand etched in her mind. Meet me alone. And she hated how obedient she felt to a voice she did not know, a warning she could neither ignore nor fully trust, but her curiosity, the need to untangle the truth of Kael's world, of her father's secrets, propelled her forward like a moth to a dangerous flame, and as the warehouse came into view, dilapidated, imposing, its windows fractured and dark, her stomach flipped in a mix of dread and resolve. The door ahead, unmarked but ominous, and when she reached for the handle, she paused, ears straining for any sign of life within, shadows moving just out of sight, and a cold sweat prickled her skin as though the building itself was aware of her trespass, and she inhaled sharply, steadying herself, the weight of every choice she had made pressing down as she pushed the door open slowly, the hinges groaning a protest, revealing the cavernous interior shrouded in darkness, a single dim light hanging from the ceiling like a cruel spotlight. And there he was, Volkov, the name Kael had whispered with caution, the man who had haunted the edges of her nightmare since she learned the truth about her father, standing with hands clasped behind his back, his posture perfect, every inch the embodiment of elegance and menace, cold eyes fixed on her as though he had been expecting her all along, his tailored suit immaculate despite the dust and decay of the warehouse, a predator in human form, every inch composed and terrifyingly aware, and she stepped inside, clutching the bag against her, voice faltering as she spoke, though the words barely formed. Who are you? And Volkov's lips curved slightly, not in warmth but in amusement, the sound of it hollow, chilling, like ice sliding across metal, and he gestured toward a worn chair in the center of the room, his movements measured, hypnotic, drawing her further in, and she felt the tug, magnetic and impossible to resist, though every nerve screamed warning, and she hesitated, her pulse a drumbeat of panic and fascination intertwined, the air thick with expectation, danger pressing from every angle, the floorboards creaking under her weight as she took a step, then another, until she was close enough to see the sharp lines of his face, the cold calculation in his eyes, and he finally spoke, voice smooth, deliberate, cutting through the silence like a knife. So, this is the nurse who has been playing with fire. And her heart stuttered, throat tightening as fear and curiosity collided. So small, so fragile, yet chosen. And she swallowed, trying to hold her voice steady, but it trembled despite her effort. I I don't understand. Why why am I here? And Volkov's gaze sharpened, a dangerous glimmer lighting his expression. Why? Because someone wants to use you, child, and someone is hiding the truth behind a mask you were foolish enough to trust. And Zahara felt her stomach drop, each word chiseling away the illusions she had desperately clung to, and a cold dread slithered through her as she realized she might have been manipulated from the start. Her steps, her choices, her trust, all through beads in a web spun by the man before her, and he moved closer, slow, deliberate, the elegance in his movement masking the lethal intent beneath. Kael, he said, almost a whisper, almost reverent in. The way he spoke the name is not your protector. He is your captor, your jailer, your illusion of safety. And Zahara's breath hitched, disbelief crashing through her like waves, shaking her to her core, her mind grappling with the idea that the man she had begun to rely on, the man who had claimed her life as his own, might have been using her from the start, a pawn in a much larger game, and Volkov's lips curved again, deadly and mocking. And yet you came, little nurse, alone, thinking you could find the truth without consequence, without risk. And a chill crawled down her spine, hands tightening around the clutch as the dim light above flickered, casting moving shadows across the walls, amplifying the sense of menace, the suffocating control Volkov exuded. And Zahara realized she had underestimated him, underestimated the reach and subtlety of this man, who could strike with elegance and ruin her in the same breath. And as he circled slowly, predatory, his eyes never leaving hers, her heart hammered, her mind raced, every fiber of her being screaming to flee. But the walls, the darkness, and the invisible chains of intrigue held her captive, every instinct warning that stepping forward, asking questions, even thinking of defiance, could bring consequences she could not imagine. And yet, even in the grip of fear, a spark of defiance flared, a stubborn pulse in her chest that refused to be crushed, and she whispered, almost under her breath, "Why me? Why now?" And Volkov stopped, standing close enough that she could feel the cold radiance of his presence, and he smiled, not warmth, but ice. "Because you are useful. You are the one who carries what everyone wants. You are the key, and whether you realize it or not, every choice you make from now on will be dictated by men like me, like him." And he gestured faintly toward the empty shadows, unspoken threat and promise, intermingling. Men who see opportunity, who see weakness, and who will exploit it without mercy. And Zahara's chest tightened as a shiver ran down her spine, the weight of her own naivety pressing in, realizing too late that stepping into the shadows had made her prey, made her a piece on a board whose rules she could not yet see, and the air thickened with tension, each heartbeat a countdown, each breath a warning as Volkov tilted his head, elegance and malice fused. And the sooner you learn that trust is a luxury you cannot afford, the longer you may survive. And her eyes widened, heart thundering, as the words settled like ice over her nerves, and she knew with a piercing certainty that the moment had arrived where she could not retreat, where the game had begun, and Volkov's shadowed smile lingered in her mind, sharp and cold, as she braced herself, unaware of how quickly the storm she had walked into would erupt, unaware that the next moment would decide everything she had fought to protect, and that her life as she knew it teetered on the edge of a knife she could not see coming. The silence that had wrapped Zahara like a suffocating cloak shattered with the roar of an engine outside, echoing through the warehouse like a herald of reckoning, and before she could comprehend, the door burst open with a thunderous crash that sent dust and debris swirling in the dim light, and Kael stepped inside, black leather and danger incarnate, eyes blazing, every muscle coiled for attack. His presence a hurricane of controlled fury that made her breath catch and her pulse spike in chaotic rhythm. Volkov's eyes widened briefly, a flicker of surprise breaking his otherwise imperious calm, and Zahara's heart leapt, a mix of relief and terror twisting inside her, because she knew with visceral certainty that Kael's entrance had just escalated the deadly game she had stepped into. Kael's gaze snapped to hers for a heartbeat, a silent command, a tether of reassurance amidst chaos, and she swallowed hard, nodding slightly, even as fear clawed at her chest, because he was here, and yet danger loomed closer with every heartbeat. Volkov's voice rang out, cold and elegant, cutting the air like a knife. "Ah, the night finally arrives." And he lifted a hand in mock greeting, his other hand subtly sliding toward a concealed weapon, and Kyle's eyes narrowed, sharp as steel, taking in the movements, calculating the threat with predator precision, his jaw tight, every line of his body taut with lethal focus, and Zahara pressed herself against a support beam, hands trembling as the reality of the confrontation pressed down with suffocating weight. Bullets erupted, the first tearing through the air, ricocheting with deafening clatter, sparks flying from metal surfaces, dust and grit filling the warehouse, and Zahara flinched, ears ringing, heart hammering, every sense screaming danger as Kael moved with fluid, lethal grace, firing back, each shot deliberate, each movement an intricate dance of death and protection, while Volkov's men, emerging from the shadows with disciplined precision, unleashed a hailstorm of gunfire, forcing Zahara to duck instinctively behind a crate, clutching the strap of her bag, knuckles white, eyes wide with fear and awe at the man who had claimed her life and now fought to keep it intact. Kael ducked low, bullets grazing his leather jacket, and he returned fire, each movement flawless, calculated, sending two of Volkov's men sprawling, their groans sharp in the chaos, and Zahara's stomach turned at the violence, yet she couldn't look away, captivated by the terrifying elegance of his fury, the way his body seemed to bend time and space, moving faster than her eyes could follow, each decision a life or death stroke in a deadly masterpiece. Glass shattered overhead, rain from a broken skylight spattering onto the concrete, mixing with the acrid smoke from gunfire, and Kael's voice cut through the cacophony, low and so, commanding, "Zahara, stay down, stay with me." And she obeyed, pressing herself flat, peering out with terror and trust mingling in equal measure as bullets whizzed past, each ricochet a punctuation mark in the symphony of danger surrounding her. Volkov stepped back, elegant, composed, lifting a hand to signal his remaining men, who advanced with lethal precision, and Kael's gaze flicked between Zahara and the advancing threat, calculating angles, movements, every heartbeat a measure of survival, and he lunged forward, pushing Zahara toward cover as another bullet tore through the air, narrowly missing her shoulder, heat and shock exploding across her nerves. The world narrowed to motion and sound, the roar of gunfire, the hiss of ricochets, the shouts and grunts, and Zahara felt herself tethered to Kael by more than instinct, by more than fear, but by something raw and urgent, a pull that demanded she trust him even as terror clawed through her veins. And she realized she was not merely a witness, she was part of the storm, her life entwined with his in ways that terrified and exhilarated her. Kael's boots pounded against the concrete, each step precise, each movement a deadly promise, and he intercepted a man advancing on Zahara, twisting, striking, firing with unerring accuracy, sending the attacker crashing into a stack of crates with a heavy thud, and Zahara gasped, realizing she was seeing something almost inhuman, a man shaped by violence, yet controlled by instinct and devotion, a guardian forged from shadow and steel. Volkov, observing from the far end, lifted his hand, and another volley of bullets tore across the room, forcing Kael to shield Zahara instinctively, body pressing against hers, a collision of heat and tension that made her gasp and tremble, and for a brief moment, time seemed suspended, only the two of them in the chaos, predator and prey entween. Ed in a lethal ballet. Kael's eyes met hers, fierce, protective, and she felt a rush of something she could not name, something that scorched her blood even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. And she realized with a jolt that the pull she had felt before, the danger, the attraction, The unspoken claim was now magnified 1,000-fold, sharpened by the immediacy of life and death, and it left her breathless. Another attacker appeared from behind a pillar, knife in hand, and Kael spun, intercepting him, the blade grazing his arm, and Zahara screamed, heart in her throat. The close brush with death too vivid, too real, and he fired without hesitation, the man collapsing in a heap, and Zahara pressed against his back, trembling, her pulse a drumbeat of raw terror and admiration. The warehouse erupted in chaos, bullets ricocheting, men shouting, glass shattering, smoke swirling, and Kael moved like a force of nature, his focus unbroken, yet Zahara's gaze kept flicking to him, noting the tension in his jaw, the slight falter in his breath when a bullet grazed too close, the quick flicker of pain he never admitted, and she felt a jolt of panic at the thought of losing him, even as she knew she had no right to, no claim, and yet could not stop the thought from rooting itself in her chest. Volkov, elegant and merciless, observed with a predator's patience, hands lifting subtly to signal more hidden assailants, and Kael's voice, low, urgent, cutting through the roar, commanded, "Move!" And Zahara's legs obeyed, adrenaline lending her strength as she scrambled behind another stack of crates, the air thick with smoke, tension, and the scent of gunpowder, each breath sharp, painful, necessary. Kael surged forward, intercepting a sudden lunge from Volkov himself, fist connecting with precision, gun discharging with deafening clarity, the force of it reverberating through the cavernous space. And Zahara pressed herself to the ground, clutching her bag, heart pounding in terror and awe, realizing in a visceral way the deadly balance between predator and prey, and how close she had come to being devoured by shadows she could not yet name. The sound of a shot rang out differently this time, slower, heavier, and Zahara froze as Kael's body jerked under the impact, the bullet striking him squarely in the shoulder, sending him staggering, eyes flashing at her in a mixture of pain, warning, and raw, unyielding protectiveness. And she felt a scream catch in her throat, the warehouse spinning around her, chaos erupting in a living nightmare as her hands shot out instinctively to him, to steady him, to keep him upright even as he growled through clenched teeth, eyes never leaving hers, the claim in his gaze intensified by the sudden vulnerability, and her chest constricted, breath catching, heart shattering, as she realized the cost of trust, the cost of the life she had stepped into, and how much she depended on the man who had already declared her his, as Volkov's shadowed figure observed with cruel satisfaction, the scene a tableau of violence, devotion, and peril, suspended in time, every heartbeat a countdown, every breath a thread between life and death, as Zahara's fingers brushed Kael's arm, grounding herself, gripping the reality of him even as danger loomed, and the roar of gunfire, the acrid smoke, the shards of broken glass, the weight of betrayal, all collided into a single point of absolute terror and desire, leaving her frozen, yet alive, tethered by the man who had claimed her, even as the world around them burned in chaos and bullets flew like deadly rain. Zahara's hands shook as she guided Kael through the darkened apartment, the faint hum of the city outside a fragile barrier against the storm of adrenaline still thrumming in her veins, his weight heavy in her arms, the leather of his jacket warm from his body, but tainted with the cold, sharp sting of blood, and she pressed a trembling palm to the wound, the ragged edges of torn fabric brushing against her fingers, her breath hitching as she realized how close she had come to losing him, how easily the world could have ended in that warehouse with a single misstep. And yet here he was, real and bleeding and dangerously alive, and every instinct she possessed screamed to run, to flee from the danger and the intensity of him. Yet another part of her, a deeper, inexplicable part, kept her rooted, tethered to him with invisible cords that twisted tight with every ragged inhale. His eyes, gray and stormy, flickered with pain, and she met his gaze, a flash of vulnerability she had never seen before, and it struck her like a bolt of lightning, shattering the rigid image of Kael the untouchable, the predator, the unyielding mafia boss. And in that moment, she saw him, raw, human, desperate, and it both terrified and captivated her, forcing her to inhale shakily, aware of the warmth of his skin, the rise and fall of his chest, and the tension in every line of his body, even as he tried to mask the pain. "You shouldn't have come with me," he muttered, voice low, rough with the edge of exhaustion and pain, and Zahara's fingers froze on the wound, swallowing hard, heart hammering, because his words, meant as warning or blame, carried something more, a thread of confession, a tether pulling her closer, even as fear tried to push her away. She shook her head, biting her lip, trying to steady her shaking hands, and whispered, "I didn't know what else to do. I I couldn't just let Volkov do that to you." And Kael's eyes softened for a fraction, shadowed by pain, yet flickering with something like gratitude, though his pride would never allow him to speak it, and the brush of her fingers against his skin, delicate and tentative, seemed to ignite a current that made her chest tight and her pulse quicken in a way she could not rationalize, and she had to consciously pull her hands away to keep from betraying the pull that had been building since the parking garage, since the first night she had met him, since every word and glance that had wrapped her life around his inextricably. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve, her hands shaking as she pressed it against the wound, the warm, sticky iron scent of blood rising. And Kael exhaled sharply, biting back a curse, his lips parting just enough for her to see the tension in his jaw, the way his body shivered against her hands, the way his grip tightened unconsciously on her shoulder when she applied pressure, and she realized, a shock twisting through her, that this was the closest she had ever been to him in terms of vulnerability, the intimacy forced by circumstance and danger, and it left her breathless, aware of every inch of him, every line, every heartbeat pounding against her chest. Kael's voice was rough again, lower now, almost hoarse. "Zahara?" And the single word made her pulse leap because it carried the weight of unspoken truths, unclaimed desire, and raw need she was not ready to acknowledge, yet could not deny. And she looked at him, trying to find the courage to speak, to reassure, to ground him, even as her mind reeled with the implications of caring so deeply for a man whose world was built on shadows and death. She adjusted the cloth, her fingers brushing his skin, and Kyle's gaze locked on hers, intense, unwavering, stripping away all pretense, all control, all the walls he had erected to survive in a ruthless world. And she saw in his eyes the confession he had not dared to voice, that he could not let her go, that he could not risk losing her, that her presence had become a tether to life and sanity he had not realized he needed until now. And the words he did finally speak, hoarse and jagged, were like fire in her veins. I can't let you walk away, even if it destroys us both." And the raw honesty, unguarded and frightening, made her chest constrict, tears threatening, heart shattering with the dangerous pull between them. Desire tangled with fear, love tangled with desperation, and she swallowed hard, unsure if she was breathing or holding it in, feeling the heat of him, the vulnerability, the magnetism of a man, claiming her soul even as he bled in her hands. The silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with unspoken words, with the weight of choices yet to be made, with the precariousness of life balanced on the edge of a knife. And Zahara pressed her forehead lightly against his shoulder, steadying herself, heart hammering, mind racing with what it meant to be so intertwined with someone whose life was constantly at risk, whose every breath could be stolen by the shadows that haunted him. Kael exhaled slowly, lips brushing against the top of her hair as he shifted slightly, not enough to move her, but enough for her to feel the warmth, the closeness, the claim implicit in the gesture, and she realized the contradiction burning in her chest. Fear and desire, repulsion and pull, anger and longing, all tangled into one impossible knot that refused to unravel. She worked silently, carefully, attending to the wound as if each movement could anchor him, could tether him to life, while the silence between them was electric, filled with thoughts unspoken, truths unshared, and emotions so raw that she feared breathing too loud would shatter the fragile balance. And yet the pull toward him, the need to be near, to touch, to protect, mirrored the danger of being drawn into his world permanently, irreversibly. Kael's hand found hers briefly, not pressing, not claiming, but holding, steadying, grounding, and her pulse skyrocketed, awareness of him acute in every nerve ending, and the whispered confession of his inability to let her go echoed in her mind like a vow she could not escape, a tether she could not sever, and she realized she had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back, no retreating to innocence, no safe harbor left in her life. The city outside faded into insignificance, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breaths, his controlled exhalations, the faint drip of blood onto the floor, and the weight of the moment, heavy, suffocating, exhilarating, intimate, terrifying, a nexus of danger and desire where every heartbeat counted and she felt the electricity between them, sharp and undeniable, a pull that both scared and thrilled her, reminding her that life, desire, and danger were now inseparably intertwined, that Kael's claim on her was not just physical but elemental, and the thought left her dizzy, breathless, heart racing. As she stepped back to grab a bottle of antiseptic, her fingers brushed a locket she had carried since childhood, the one her father had given her, the chain cool against her skin. And she paused, staring at it with sudden clarity, the faint glint of a clasp and a hidden compartment making her heart stutter as realization dawned that even in the chaos, in the blood and fear, her father had left a clue, a thread of his own secrets, waiting for her to unravel it. And Zahara's mind reeled with questions, possibilities, the weight of inheritance, the danger of discovery, and the knowledge that this simple, delicate piece of jewelry could contain the key to survival, the key to uncovering truths that Volkov and others would kill to keep hidden. And the thought left her trembling with equal parts fear and anticipation, breath catching, heart thundering, every nerve ending alert. Kael, sensing her hesitation, glanced at the locket, eyes narrowing, pain and concern mingling in the depths of his gaze, and in that silent exchange, Zahara felt the full magnitude of their intertwined fates, the danger of the path ahead, and the pull of something deeper than fear, deeper than duty, something that tethered her irrevocably to him, to his life, to the storm they were both caught in, knowing that whatever she discovered next could change everything, and that in the quiet, in the fragile intimacy of the moment, their lives, hearts, and destinies were poised on the edge of revelation. Zahara's fingers trembled as she unclasped the delicate chain, the cool metal sliding through her shaking hands, and she felt the faint weight of the locket settle in her palm like a secret waiting to be unveiled, her pulse racing as she fumbled with the tiny clasp, heart hammering with the mixture of fear, curiosity, and the ever-present pull toward Kael, who watched her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush, a mixture of pain, concern, and something unspoken swirling in his eyes. And she knew, even before the locket clicked open, that what lay within would shift everything she thought she knew about her father, about the people hunting them, about the fragile threads of trust she had so painfully built. The small compartment opened with a soft click, and inside was a tiny, folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, and a slender, ornate key, metal etched with intricate designs that caught the dim light like it contained its own fire. And Zahara's breath caught in her throat, realizing that her father had hidden more than memories here, more than love or sentimentality. He had left instructions, a path, a lifeline, and the magnitude of it left her shaking, fingers clutching the paper and key as if they alone could anchor her amidst the chaos of Kael's world. Kael leaned closer, dark eyes fixed on her face, reading her expression as though it were a map, and she felt a jolt of heat at the intensity of his gaze, the raw power behind it, the vulnerability she had glimpsed earlier amplified by the need to protect, to claim, to ensure she survived this revelation. And yet, he did not reach for the locket, did not touch the secret, only watched, a silent sentinel, his presence both comforting and terrifying, reminding her how dangerously bound she had become to him. Zahara unfolded the tiny slip of paper carefully, her hands steadying as she read her father's neat, precise handwriting, each word deliberate, weighted with meaning, a father speaking across the void, whispering truths that had been kept from her, secrets hidden in shadow to protect her even after he was gone, and she felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, a mixture of grief, awe, and the staggering realization that her father had known this day might come, that someone like Volkov would never stop hunting her, that only by following the path he had left could she hope to survive. Kael's voice, low and rough, broke through the silence. "What is it?" And she held the paper and key close, trying to steady her voice, trying to maintain control, though her pulse threatened to betray her. "It's a key and instructions from my father." And the weight of the words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy, almost sacred, the gravity of legacy, danger, and trust pressing down like a physical force. Kael reached out then, gently, carefully, placing a hand over hers, over the locket and key, and Zahara felt a surge of warmth and tension, desire tangled with fear, the brush of his fingers grounding her, even as it ignited a fire deep in her chest, a pull she had fought since the first moment they met, now undeniable, raw, and frightening in its intensity, and she looked up into his stormy eyes, searching for understanding, for guidance, for the assurance that he would help her navigate the peril her father had foretold. "You need to follow this," Kael murmured, voice husky, low, carrying the weight of command, warning, and desire all at once. "Every step. One misstep, and Volkov won't hesitate, not for a second." And Zahara nodded, heart racing, aware of the fragile line she now walked between life and death, trust and betrayal, love and obsession, and the intimacy of the moment, his hand still over hers, palm warm, thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles, made her acutely aware of every pulse, every breath, every heartbeat shared in silence, dangerous and exquisite all at once. She tucked the paper and key safely into her bag, eyes flicking up to Kael, searching for his expression, needing to read him, to understand his intentions, and she saw it all there. Worry, protectiveness, desire, unspoken promises, and the unyielding intensity of a man who had declared her his even when the world demanded she be lost, and her chest tightened, caught in the storm of her own emotions, raw and consuming. Kael's fingers lingered near hers, not moving away, and she felt the magnetic tension in the small space between them, a pull that made her shiver despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. And she realized that the danger, the secrecy, the violence surrounding them only heightened the connection, the claim, the sense of belonging she felt, terrifying in its intensity, exhilarating in its undeniable truth. Zahara drew in a shaky breath, her fingers brushing the locket again, the hidden key a tangible link to her father, a promise of answers, a potential weapon against the enemies she had yet to fully understand. And she knew that her life, her survival, and perhaps even her heart depended on deciphering the path laid out in this tiny piece of jewelry, guided by the man she could not walk away from, no matter how dangerous, no matter how consuming, no matter how forbidden. Kael watched her closely, his eyes dark, unreadable yet fiercely intent, every flicker of his gaze a question, a claim, a warning, and she felt the electricity between them pulse, a living thing, dangerous and intoxicating, and the thought made her chest ache, desire and fear interwoven in a knot that could not be untangled, even as the weight of the key in her hand reminded her of the larger stakes, the path she had to walk, the legacy of secrets and violence her father had left behind, and the way Kael's world had merged with hers irreversibly. The night outside deepened, shadows pooling in the corners of the room, the city distant but alive, lights flickering faintly through the blinds, and Zahara felt a sudden clarity, a spark of determination, tempered with fear, that the lock, it was more than an object, more than a clue. It was a link to truth, to justice, to understanding the father she had loved yet never fully known, and the man who had claimed her, whose life now intertwined with hers in ways she could never escape, would guide her through it, even if the path was perilous, even if the darkness sought to consume them both. Kael finally released her hand slowly, though his gaze never wavered, and she felt a pang of loss in the gesture, a reminder of the vulnerability she had glimpsed in him, of the intimacy forced by survival and circumstance. And yet she knew in her bones that the connection, the claim, the tether between them was unbreakable, bound by blood, danger, and desire. And as Zahara held the locket close, key hidden safely, she understood that the next step she took would define not just her survival, but the fragile, unspoken, electrifying bond that had formed between them, and that the storm of secrets, lies, and passion was far from over, with every beat of her heart a countdown to revelation, confrontation, and perhaps unexpected surrender. The night air was cool and fragrant as Zahara and Kael navigated the winding forest road, headlights cutting through the darkness in narrow beams that danced across the trees, the distant call of owls punctuating the tense silence between them, and Zahara's fingers brushed against the locket hidden safely in her bag, the delicate key inside a reminder of her father's secrets and the danger that still lingered around them, while Kael's presence beside her was a constant grounding force, a tether in the storm of uncertainty that had become her life, his hand occasionally brushing hers, as if instinctively checking, silently claiming, and warning her of the peril they had yet to face. The path opened suddenly to the lake, moonlight glittering across the water like shattered glass. The are filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and there, nestled among the trees on a slight rise, was the old family lake house, abandoned yet standing with stubborn defiance, windows dark, roof weathered, and the faint outline of the dock stretching into the water. A place frozen in time, waiting, like her father's secrets, for her to uncover them. And she swallowed hard, heart fluttering with the mixture of fear, anticipation, and the faint thrill of being near Kael in this isolated sanctuary, far from the city, far from the chaos, yet still dangerously close to the shadows that pursued them. Kael stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with precise, deliberate movements, his body coiled with readiness, eyes flicking from tree line to dock, every instinct alert, and Zahara followed, each step cautious, boots crunching on gravel, nerves taut, yet a strange warmth spread through her chest, the first flicker of calm she had felt since Volkov's trap, and she realized with a jolt that in Kael's presence, even amidst danger, she felt a fragile, undeniable safety, as though he was not just a protector of her life, but of something more intimate, something essential to her very being. The lake reflected the moon in a sheet of silver, gentle ripples moving lazily with the night wind, and Kael gestured toward the front door with a silent nod, every movement fluid, elegant, commanding, yet restrained, and Zahara felt herself drawn forward by the combination of his authority and the subtle, magnetic pull he exerted on her, aware of the brush of his coat against her arm, the shadow of his closeness, the way the heat from his body seemed to seep into her bones, grounding her and igniting something she had fought to resist since the day she had answered that wrong number. Inside, the house was cloaked in dust and shadows, the remnants of a life once lived scattered across the floor, faded photographs on walls, the scent of age and memory heavy in the air, and Zahara ran a trembling hand along the banister as they ascended to the small sitting room with a fireplace. Old logs stacked neatly though dry, and Kael moved with purpose, striking a single match that ignited a flame in the hearth, the firelight flickering across his face, softening his features in a way that made her chest tighten, revealing a side of him few had ever glimpsed, the predator momentarily giving way to something tender, human, and profoundly compelling. She sank into the worn sofa, the fire's warmth washing over her as Kael moved to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed, and Zahara felt a flutter she could not name, a mixture of desire, comfort, and something deeper, a magnetic pull that tied her to him in ways that transcended danger, and she dared a glance upward, catching the briefest of smiles on his lips, subtle yet full of promise, and the intensity of his gaze left her breathless, pulse quickening in a way that made her fingers curl into the soft fabric of her sweater, unable to look away. The firelight danced in Kael's eyes, gray shifting to silver with each flicker, and he spoke, voice low, roughened by emotion he rarely displayed. "You're braver than you know." And she felt heat rush to her cheeks, ears tingling, because the words were not just about courage, but an acknowledgement of her presence, her resilience, her ability to hold herself in the face of peril. And she swallowed, chest tight, struggling to steady her voice. I feel safer with you than anywhere else." And the confession, small but honest, hung between them, heavy with meaning, truth, and the weight of unspoken emotion, and Kael's lips curved just slightly, the barest acknowledgement, yet it made her pulse flutter, heart hammering. He leaned just enough to close the distance, not touching, but the warmth from his body, the subtle movement, the proximity that made her skin tingle, was electric. The space between them charged with tension, desire, and the fragility. I have a moment that could shatter if words or actions betrayed them, and Zahara felt it, that almost kiss moment, the longing, the restraint, the magnetic pull that held them captive in their own private storm. And she shivered, breath catching, hands resting tensely on her lap, fighting the urge to reach, to close the gap, to surrender to the pull, even as fear of the world outside reminded her that danger was never far. Kael shifted slightly, just enough to brush her hand lightly, and the touch sent sparks through her nerves, a whisper of warmth, a claim unspoken, yet undeniable, and she looked into his eyes, gray storm and silver flame, searching for permission, searching for meaning, finding only the mirrored intensity of her own feelings, the reflection of desire, worry, and something deeper, something neither could yet name, and she realized that the bond between them had deepened, tangled with trust, fear, and longing, making the chaos of their world feel both distant and imminent. The fire crackled, shadows stretching and dancing on the walls, the scent of smoke and pine mixing with the faint perfume Kael carried, creating a heady, intoxicating atmosphere. And Zahara let herself relax fractionally, curling slightly into the warmth, aware that every flicker of flame, every movement, every shared glance carried the weight of unspoken promises, of loyalty and desire intertwined, and of the peril that still waited beyond the safety of this fragile sanctuary. Kael's hand rested near hers, a heartbeat away, and she felt the pulse of life and energy radiating from him, and for a moment the world narrowed to the firelight, the quiet intimacy, the electricity crackling silently, a fragile bubble where danger, passion, and connection coexisted, and she dared to hope that in this brief respite she could see him, understand him, perhaps even allow herself to fall into the gravity of him, even as the storm beyond their walls waited, and yet in that suspended moment, their hearts and breaths synchronized, the almost kiss lingering in the charged air, desire tempi, read by restraint, the promise of what could be whispered in every glance, every shiver, every subtle, tender movement, and Zahara felt the rarest sensation, safety, belonging, and the pulse of life in the arms of the man who had claimed her, even as shadows of the world outside crept closer, unnoticed, biding their time, waiting to strike, reminding them both that peace, however fleeting, was always fragile and temporary, and that the next heartbeat could change everything, a threat hidden in the night, ready to shatter their fragile intimacy, their trust, and the tenuous sense of sanctuary that the firelight and their closeness had given them, leaving them poised on the edge of both desire and disaster, hearts entangled, breaths shallow, as the first signs of danger stirred in the darkness beyond the lake house, waiting to erupt. The night erupted into chaos as the first shots rang out, echoing across the lake, and Zahara felt her chest constrict as adrenaline surged. Kael's hands gripping hers with a force that tethered her to him even as they sprinted toward the dock, water slapping beneath their feet, the reflection of moonlight on the rippling surface blinding in its brilliance and chaotic in its movement, each step a test of balance and nerve, and Kael's voice, low and commanding, cut through the din. "Hold on, don't look back." And she obeyed instinctively, eyes forward, heart hammering, the roar of her own pulse competing with the gunfire and splashing water, feeling the heat of him beside her, the danger sharpening every sense to a razor edge, making the cold night air burn against her skin. They dove onto the small motorboat, Kael kicking off the dock with precision, water spraying as the engine roared to life, and Zahara clutched the sides, teeth gritted, feeling the violent sway of the boat under their weight, wind whipping through her hair, the locket and key pressed against her chest as a fragile anchor amid the chaos, while Kael's eyes scanned the shadows along the shore, every movement fluid, calculated, a predator navigating the water with the skill that had kept him alive in far deadlier encounters, and she realized again and again how utterly dependent she had become on his instincts, his presence, his claim, even as terror and longing tangled inside her. Bullets splashed dangerously close, water hissing around them, and she flinched as one ricocheted off the boat's edge, the force vibrating through her fingertips, while Kael's arm shifted instinctively to shield her. Muscles taut, eyes narrowed, jaw set, lips pressed in a thin line, every sinew coiled for both attack and defense, and she felt that electrifying combination of fear and trust that had defined their journey since the call, since the warehouse, since every heartbeat that had tethered them in life and death. The boat skidded across the moonlit water, wake shimmering like silver fire, trees blurring past, and Zahara's stomach lurched with every sharp turn Kael took to avoid gunfire from Volkov's men chasing them from the dock, her pulse racing in sync with the engine's roar, and yet through the terror, she felt a fleeting thrill, a twisted exhilaration at the proximity of danger, the intimacy of survival, the undeniable pull toward the man who had claimed her, who risked everything with every motion to keep her alive. And she could not look away from him, even for a second, from the tense, focused perfection of his form as he maneuvered them through chaos. The moonlight glinted off the lake, illuminating the abandoned boathouse ahead, the weathered wood and rusted metal glimmering ominously, and Kael guided the boat with steady hands, slowing it just enough to let them climb onto the dock, feet slipping slightly on wet wood, and Zahara's hand shot out instinctively, brushing against his arm, a tether, a connection, a momentary spark of intimacy amid the danger, and he caught her gaze for just an instant, a flicker of warmth and something unspoken passing between them, grounding her even as her pulse hammered in terror. Inside the boathouse, dust motes danced in shafts of moonlight streaming through broken windows, the smell of old wood and damp water filling her senses, and Kael moved forward, sweeping the area, alert, protective, while Zahara's hands shook as she reached for the hidden compartment her father had described in the letter she had found, every movement deliberate, careful, heart in her throat, feeling the weight of destiny, survival, and the connection to the father she had loved and lost, every nerve screaming as she uncovered the small metal case, the hard drive nestled inside like a heart beating with dangerous secrets, and she inhaled sharply, fingers curling around it, understanding the magnitude of what they now held, the power to bring Volkov's empire crashing down. Kael's gaze flicked to her, sharp, assessing, and she met his eyes, feeling the pulse of relief, the shared weight of responsibility. And then, the folded envelope resting atop the drive drew her attention, trembling hands breaking the seal to reveal her father's handwriting, precise and calm even in the face of death. words etched with warning, with trust, with a final plea, and she read aloud, voice barely above a whisper, "Trust only Kael Vance." And the sound of the words sent a shiver down her spine, a mixture of comfort and dread intertwining. The confirmation that the man she had feared, resisted, and yet craved was her only ally, her only tether in a world that had tried to destroy her from the start. Kael's voice was low, protective, carrying both pride and relief. "We got it. You're safe. For now." But Zahara's eyes lingered on the envelope, mind racing with questions, implications, and the inevitable consequences, realizing that this was only a pause, a brief moment of victory before the storm resumed, and she felt the familiar pull toward him, toward the warmth, strength, and magnetic danger he exuded, chest tightening, awareness of every inch of his presence electrifying her nerves, drawing her closer, even as logic screamed caution. She rose to move, scanning the boathouse for threats, every shadow a potential danger, and Kael's hand brushed her back, guiding, steadying, grounding. The intimate gesture brief yet incendiary, sending warmth through her, a silent promise that he would not let her fall, that he would carry the weight of danger, blood, and secrets as long as she remained beside him, and she leaned slightly into his guidance, acknowledging the comfort, the pull, the tether of them in this shared peril. Footsteps outside, faint but deliberate, made her freeze, heart skipping a beat, and Kael's hand shifted to grip hers, fingers tightening in warning, eyes narrowing, body coiled like a spring ready to strike, and she felt the electrifying thrill of fear and anticipation, knowing instinctively that the moment of calm was ending, that the shadows held threats that had tracked them here, and that the fragile intimacy they had just shared would be tested by violence, by survival, by choices that could cost everything. Volkov's presence loomed suddenly as a silhouette in the doorway, gun raised, elegance and menace wrapped in a single form, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction, and Zahara's pulse raced as the weight of danger collided with the firelight of their small victory, understanding with cold clarity that nothing would be easy, that every step forward carried the potential for death, betrayal, and heartbreak, and Kael's protective stance, unwavering even as the threat became immediate, reinforced the inescapable truth that their lives, fates, and hearts were now inseparably bound, the night alive with tension, bullets, and the unspoken promise that nothing could remain the same after this moment. The hard drive, the letter, and their shared peril marking the beginning of the final storm to come. Volkov's silhouette dominated the doorway, gun raised, eye as glinting with cruel triumph, and Kael stepped forward, muscles coiled, every line of his body taut with lethal readiness, the firelight flickering across his face, casting shadows that made him look both terrifying and magnetic. And Zahara's heart hammered as she instinctively stepped closer to him, despite the fear curling through her chest, because this man, this predator, this force of darkness, had claimed her in ways that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, and she knew instinctively that she could not turn away now, that survival depended on courage, instinct, and the fragile thread of trust she had placed in Kael. Volkov spoke, voice smooth, icy. "I warned you, Vance. This isn't your world." And Kael's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, lips parting just enough to reply, low and deadly. "It is now." And the words were a promise and a threat, charged with energy, rage, and the unspoken claim of a man who had vowed to protect what was his, even as the night itself seemed to hold its breath. The lake reflecting the chaos, moonlight glinting off rippling water, bullets flying too close for comfort, the scent of gunpowder and wood thick in the air, and Zahara's hands shook, gripping the hard drive like a talisman, knowing that the next moments could decide life or death, loyalty or betrayal. The first clash came with explosive force, Kael lunging forward, fists and elbows moving in a deadly rhythm honed by years of training, years of survival, years of violence, and Volkov met him with equal ferocity, each strike echoing through the boathouse, wood splintering, water lapping violently at the dock outside. And Zahara flinched as a gunshot cracked near them, her breath catching, eyes darting for the source, feeling the pull to act even as fear clawed at her chest. Kael twisted, narrowly dodging a strike that could have ended him, the force throwing him against a beam, and Zahara cried out, heart in her throat, and in that instant, something snapped inside her, the fear giving way to fury, survival, and determination, and she raised the backup hard drive. She had hidden in her bag, slamming it against the nearest wall with all the strength her adrenaline could muster, the metal striking Volkov's face, sparks of chaos scattering, giving Kael the opening he needed to strike back, and her pulse raced, chest tight, realizing that she had contributed to the battle, had stepped into the danger rather than cowering, the terror and thrill of it igniting a fire she had never known she possessed. Volkov roared, staggering back from the blow, blood trickling from a split lip, eyes wide with shock and rage, and Kael surged forward, fists and feet moving in lethal, precise strikes, each blow a testament to skill, fury, and the unspoken bond between him and the woman he had claimed, who now stood at the periphery, courage blazing in her gaze, a fire that matched his own. And Zahara felt a dizzying mixture of fear, pride, and desire as she watched him move with grace and violence, knowing that survival, victory, and their intertwined fates hung on the edge of a knife. Outside, the thrum of helicopter blades cut through the night, Kael's men arriving in a storm of gunfire, shadows shifting with each flash, men descending with efficiency and precision, rifles trained, shouting commands, the air thick with smoke and adrenaline, and Zahara's heart leapt, knowing help had arrived, yet also knowing that the chaos, the danger, the storm of bullets and fists was far from over, that every second mattered, and that the man before her, Kael, was both the source of her safety and the eye of the hurricane threatening to consume them. Volkov rallied, striking with renewed brutality, forcing Kael to respond with equal ferocity. The fight a blur of movement, grunts, and the sickening crack of bone against bone, each strike carrying the weight of vengeance, pride, and raw survival instinct. And Zahara flinched with each impact, hands pressed against, her mouth trembling, unable to look away, heart pounding, mind spinning, yet feeling the undeniable pull toward Kael, toward the danger, toward the man who had claimed her so completely, whose vulnerability and strength intertwined in ways that left her breathless. As Kael gained the upper hand, dodging a swing and delivering a counterblow that sent Volkov reeling, Zahara's hands shook, eyes darting to the hard drive again, knowing that it represented both the key to victory and the ultimate proof that Volkov could be brought down. That justice, revenge, and survival intersected in the cold metal of that tiny device, and she gritted her teeth, breathing shallow, ready to act if necessary, heart pounding in perfect synchronization with the chaotic rhythm of the fight. Kael's men landed with thunder, moving with lethal precision, guns trained on Volkov's men, suppressing fire cutting through the chaos, and Zahara felt the ground shift under the combined force of her allies, the storm of bullets, and the relentless combat. Every sense alive, sharp, electric, heart-hammering in terror, excitement, and the undeniable thrill of survival. Her gaze never leaving Kael, who moved with lethal beauty, each strike calculated, raw, and mesmerizing. A predator and protector rolled into one, and she realized, with breath catching, that she had never felt more alive, more afraid, or more completely tethered to someone in her life. In a daring, split-second decision, Zahara hurled the backup hard drive with precision, striking Volkov squarely in the face again, giving Kael the critical opening to sweep him off balance, and she staggered back, pulse racing, adrenaline surging, aware of her courage, her role, her impact, and the intoxicating pull toward Kael that made her chest ache with longing, fear, and an undeniable, almost forbidden desire. Her body trembling as she absorbed the sea, torm of violence and passion in front of her. Kael seized the moment, pinning Volkov against a crate, gun drawn, eyes flashing with triumph and deadly intent, and Zahara's breath caught, hands pressed. Against her chest, torn between fear, exhilaration, and the knowledge that the next decision could define not only Volkov's fate, but the trajectory of her own life, the bond she shared with Kael, and the fragile thread of survival that had brought them both to this apex. Volkov, bloodied, eyes defiant yet wide with the sudden shift of power, glared at Zahara, his presence a looming threat even as Kael's control dominated the room, and she realized with sudden clarity that the choice before her was irrevocable, terrifying, and absolute. Life or death, mercy or vengeance, trust or betrayal, the weight of her father's warnings, the hard drive, and her love for the man who had claimed her colliding in a single electric heartbeat, and the tension crackled in the air, heavy, suffocating, alive. A storm paused only for the next motion, the next breath, the next decision that would seal their fates and leave nothing unchanged. Kael's gun remained steady, aimed at Volkov's heart, eyes unwavering, body tense, a living instrument of lethal control, and Zahara felt the intensity of the moment press down, every nerve ending alight, every heartbeat echoing in her ears, the adrenaline, fear, and desire swirling into a vortex that made her feel weightless yet trapped, exhilarated yet terrified, aware that whatever choice she made now would echo in the aftermath, in the blood, in the hearts of those who had survived, and in the tenuous bond that tethered her to Kael in ways that were unbreakable, undeniable, and impossibly consuming. Zahara's hands trembled as she stared at Volkov, the weight of choice pressing down on her chest, every instinct screaming at her, every heartbeat a thunderclap in the silence of the boathouse, the gun heavy in Kael's grip, his body coiled with lethal precision, eyes storm gray and silver with intensity, his chest rising and falling with controlled breath. HS. And she realized in that moment that everything, the terror, the danger, the chaos, the passion, the love, the fear, had led them here, to this impossible junction where life and death, vengeance and mercy, choice and destiny intertwined. And her mind raced as she understood that the hard drive, the letter from her father, the blood spilled, the chaos they had endured, had all been steps toward this final test. And yet amidst the terror, a strange, almost tender calm settled over her as she met Kael's gaze, reading the unspoken question, the raw, feral claim in his eyes, the subtle plea masked beneath the veneer of control and power, and she felt the magnetic pull of him, the undeniable tether that had bound them from the first wrong call, from the first touch, from the first shared glance in the shadows of the world he commanded. Volkov's defiance faltered as he assessed the determination blazing in her eyes, the steel of her spine, the courage that had been honed by every peril they had survived together, and a cruel smile flickered across Kael's lips, not of triumph, but of relief, pride, and something intimate, private, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had forged in blood, fire, and desire. And Zahara felt a shiver run through her as the realization settled in. She had the power here, the choice, the agency, and yet she had never felt safer than standing beside Kael, whose presence was at once a shield, a claim, and a promise. And she drew a breath, steadying herself, heart hammering with the tension, the danger, and the pull of the man who had transformed her life from the moment she had answered that fateful call. With a swift, decisive motion, Volkov lunged, desperation and rage surging, but Kael reacted instantly, gun-trained, body fluid and lethal, and in a flash, the fight turned, the predator and the protector in perfect sync, every movement precise. Every strike and counterstrike a symphony of violence and survival, the echoes of gunfire and splintering wood filling the air, and Zahara felt her pulse match the rhythm, a drumbeat of fear, exhilaration, and longing, adrenaline surging, awareness sharpened, knowing that every breath, every second could decide the outcome. Yet in the midst of chaos, her mind snapped into clarity, the memory of her father's words, the letter, the hidden key, the hard drive, all converged, and she realized that survival was not just about brute force. It was about cunning, courage, and choice. And she seized the moment, stepping forward with the confidence that had been tempered in fire, gripping the hard drive firmly, and with a yell born of terror and determination, she smashed it toward Volkov's face, the metal and plastic shattering against him, giving Kael the opening to pin him decisively, the fight reaching its climax, the storm of danger finally yielding to control. And for a fleeting heartbeat, silence fell, broken only by heavy breathing, the water lapping outside, the crackling of the firelight from the boathouse still smoldering in her memory, and Zahara's chest heaved with the knowledge that the end was within reach. Kael's hand steadied on Volkov, gun aimed true, eyes locked on the defeated man, muscles taut, body coiled with power and control, and Zahara felt the weight of her own choice pressing in, the gravity of life and death, mercy and vengeance, and she realized that in this moment the world could tilt either way, and she alone would define the outcome. Yet in Kael's steady, stormy gaze, she found the silent reassurance, the shared understanding, that whatever she chose, he would honor it, protect it, and stand beside her, bound by danger, desire, and trust forged in the fire of shared peril. Volkov, bloodied, beaten, defiance flickering in his eyes like the last embers of a dying fire, spat words of hatred, threats, and curses spilling. But Zahara's resolve solidified, clarity surging through her, heart pounding with the thrill of agency, the power of revival, and the strange, overwhelming pull of love that had grown from fear, passion, and relentless proximity. And she met Kael's gaze, a single nod confirming the unspoken agreement, the fusion of courage, desire, and destiny. And with deliberate calm, she whispered, voice steady though filled with intensity, "It ends now." The words a declaration, a verdict, a claim of control in the eye of chaos. Kael's fingers tightened slightly on the gun, a silent acknowledgement, tension in the room electrifying, every muscle coiled, every breath shared between them, and Zahara stepped closer, moving within the orbit of the man who had claimed her, whose presence was a tether, a storm, and a sanctuary, and she realized with a shiver of relief and longing that she had never been more connected, more alive, more utterly intertwined with someone in her life, as the final act of confrontation played out before her, and in that moment, she knew the choice she made would define not just the life of the defeated enemy, but the path she and Kael would walk together. With a final sharp exhale, Kael pressed the gun into Volkov's chest, defiance meeting inevitability, and Zahara, heart racing, fingers brushing his arm instinctively, felt the gravity of victory, the thrill of survival, and the magnetic pull of intimacy, the culmination of desire and trust, and she knew that she could not step back, could not deny the claim that had always existed between them, that had grown through terror, passion, and unyielding proximity. And she stepped forward fully, closing the space, gaze locking with his, chest rising with controlled breaths, hands brushing, sparks igniting in every subtle touch, every almost kiss moment, the culmination of months of fear, longing, and heart-stopping intensity, and she allowed herself to embrace the bond that had formed in shadow, danger, and desire. Kael's lips parted slightly, eyes softening despite the hard lines of the man who commanded, the predator tempered by human need, by the intensity of a connection that went beyond control, territory, or survival, and Zahara felt the warmth of surrender and claim, a tender, electric intimacy that left her breathless, heart racing, pulse synced to his, a rhythm that had been building since the first accidental call, the first threatening arrival, the first shared glance of vulnerability, and she finally allowed herself to admit, in thought, breath, and heart, that she would never walk away. The firelight from the dock flickered in memory, reflections dancing across their skin as she whispered softly, "I'm not walking away." And Kael's eyes widened slightly, a storm of relief, passion, and disbelief passing over his features, before dark humor and tenderness settled into his stormy gaze, the tension melting into the rarest form of peace they had both ever known, and he responded, voice low, gravelly, intimate, "Then welcome to my world." And the words, simple yet charged, resonated through the night, binding them in trust, danger, and desire. The night outside seemed to hold its breath, the water lapping softly, the shadows receding, and Zahara felt the culmination of every fear, every danger, every heartbeat shared with Kael crystallize into certainty that the wrong number, the call at 2:37 a.m., had not been a mistake, but the prelude to destiny, a chain of events that led her to the man who would fight for her, protect her, and claim her in every sense. And as she looked into his storm-gray eyes, the finality of survival, love, and choice converged. The terror replaced by exhilaration, danger replaced by passion, and she allowed herself a smile, slow, victorious, and intimate, whispering the words that echoed through her chest, heart, and soul. The wrong number wasn't a mistake. It was my destiny,